And you're live, Neil. Go.
I missed the balloons.
You missed balloons?
They were fun 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Why can't we have more balloons? It was,
You should be the balloon you want to see in the world.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it, yeah. I've got clown shoes. Just need a balloon outfit, the clown outfit.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of balloons. And then the US Air Force can shoot them all down.
Yeah.
And,
just on that topic, like it's, I think those are just, those four, other four.
It did end there, right?
Yes. Apparently, it's a bit of hysteria, Everybody gets excited about balloons and starts talking about balloons. But those four that came after the original and best Chinese spy balloon, the original, I think it's trademark now. It got so much attention that even the remains of it have become conscious. Got kind of AI, and it's now you have to call it.
I didn't follow up. Did they got it out of the ocean, fished it out?
Got it out, yeah.
And
of course.
What?
Talk to them.
It's alive. It's sentient.
It said, "Take me to your leader," and I said, "Nah, you don't."
Signed, bang.
Yeah. No, the ones after that, Alaska, Yukon, Canada, over Montana, and then over Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes, supposedly. Those were just actually weather balloons, like pretty piddly little small weather balloons that they, in their kind of like hysteria slash probably more importantly desire to rehabilitate their image of being weak because of the original Chinese balloon. They just shot down a bunch of normal weather balloons, and I'm talking about quite small little weather balloons, and that's why you haven't heard anything about it, why they've gone quiet on it, and they haven't said anything specific or definitive about them, because it would be a bit embarrassing if you produced small lump of latex, to the world's press and say, yes, this is what we shot down. Like, isn't that a weather balloon? Like the one of like the kinds that there are thousands that are released across the world every day.
Let me stop you. That's not what have they said that they were.
No. I'm saying that's what
you're saying. Okay, because you remember that the surrounding the 4 or 3 or 4 after the first one, they gave very strange descriptions.
One pilot allegedly said it interfered with their sensors and blah, 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 nonsense. And the other one was, don't know how it's remaining aloft, blah, blah, blah. But nothing came of that.
Last one, Yukon, which happened while we were airing last Sunday, it's octagonal in shape.
Right.
I mean, you cannot mistake that from a spherical balloon. It was, why would he say that?
Octagonal, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the case is closed as far as the US government, because the final word on this was Biden, and then there's been zero.
It all went away.
Do you want to listen to what Biden's wrap-up of it was?
Wrap it up there.
This is Biden speaking, of course, from a teleprompter on behalf of the CIA, but whatever.
The Bob Byrne chief.
How long is it?
It's just 3 hours.
Hopefully it's just a minute.
3-hour discourse.
No, it's just short, I think.
For the incursion by China's high-altitude balloon, our military, through the North American Aerospace Defense Command, so-called NORAD, closely scrutinized
so-called NORAD
our airspace, including enhancing our radar to pick up more slow-moving objects above our country around the world. In doing so, they tracked 3 unidentified
our country around
objects,
the world. What?
One in Alaska, Canada, and over Lake Huron in the Midwest. They acted in accordance with established parameters for determining how to deal with unidentified aerial objects in U.S. airspace. At their recommendation, I gave the order to take down these 3 objects due to hazards to civilian commercial air traffic and because we could not rule out the surveillance risk of sensitive facilities. We acted in consultation with the Canadian government. I spoke personally with Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada on Saturday. And just as critically, we acted out of an abundance of caution and an opportunity that allowed us to take down these objects safely. Our military and the Canadian military are seeking to recover the debris so we can learn more about these 3 objects. Our intelligence committee is still assessing all 3 incidences. They're reporting to me daily and will continue their urgent efforts to do so, and I will communicate that to the Congress.
Yeah.
We don't yet know exactly what these three objects were,
Yeah.
but nothing
Actually,
right
doesn't.
now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program
Right.
or that they were surveillance vehicles from
Right.
any other country. The intelligence community's current assessment is that these three objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research.
What a fucking idiot.
So he kind of confirmed what you're saying.
Yeah.
They're most likely weather balloons.
Yeah.
And he leaves that to last after saying, out of an abundance of caution,
Exactly.
we shot them down.
Right. Nonsense.
We're still figuring out our intelligence agencies are
Right.
on them, but they think they're weather balloons.
That's just pure propaganda, pure propaganda exercise to make up for the short-term, short-lived media frenzy over America looks. I've never seen this country look so weak, so incredibly weak as a result of this Chinese spy balloon. Blah blah. We talked about that last week, and what was really going on with that. It was really a nothing burger as well. But except that they wanted to build it up into.
Or you're thinking that they're thinking long term. This starts to set the road for a Chinese threat to our country.
Just turned the screw on rhetoric, anti-Chinese rhetoric, basically saying that they had this.
It was
balloon
super effective.
Yeah.
I mean, more than effective.
Because
people don't need much
right.
to get their anti-China genes going.
Because they've been primed for it, and it was a like we talked about last week. There were multiple occasions across the US, not necessarily directly across the US, but in US or over US airspace, over US territory, and other countries. This kind of thing happens regularly enough with these larger, the actual spy balloons. We showed some pictures of them over Japan, over Taiwan. There were others over Australia and other countries around the world in the last X number of years, and no one ever made a big hoo-ha about it, except America decided to make a big hoo-ha about it this time. And I'm saying, they were exactly the same types of balloons. They were large balloons with kind of the metal, the array underneath, whatever, of solar panels, etc. So there was no reason for them whatsoever to have that little piece of Looney Tunes and work everybody up over it, but they did. And the only explanation, as far as I'm concerned, is to increase anti-Chinese rhetoric and to make sour Chinese American relations. And probably it was the CIA that was behind it, or that kind of deep state element that wants to actually dial up the rhetoric, anti-Chinese rhetoric, and get people afraid and get them worked up. But then they were left with a problem in the sense that, along with the hysteria, came the claims that, we look incredibly weak, right? It was part of the whole hysteria. You're going to work people up, and we're being invaded by a Chinese balloon. How could Biden do this? And of course, the conservatives were using it as an opportunity to attack partisan politics, using it to attack the Biden administration and calling it weak and all this kind of stuff. So that second part of it, of that Biden was talking about there, where they scanned for everything, and anything that was slightly off course, going to shoot it down, i.e. normal weather balloons. There's a few that go awry every year, or every week, every day almost. So they went up and just shot down a small amount of latex out of there. In fact, they probably didn't shoot them down at all. I'm suspicious.
Where's the footage of the other ones?
Well, yeah. Well, they're not going to show the footage of it. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Biden would be able to hold it in one hand, a lump of latex. This is what we shot down. Does this make me look stronger now? No, it doesn't. It makes you look like a fucking idiot. So they're not going to do that. They're not going to. That's the end of the story. What he just said there. That's it. Over and done with. They were, and he admitted it to a certain extent. But it was like, out of an abundance of caution. You never know. These things could have provided a threat to civilian airliners or civilian traffic, or
sensitive,
maybe sensitive areas.
Because the right wing in the States was like making up theories about, well, these things were going on a certain path, past minute airways,
nonsense.
Just they're putting this to bed, so we will too. But the Chinese, one of their statements on this after we aired the show last week, where you said this happens all the time. What about China? They have US high altitude balloons traversing all the time, and that was confirmed. Just put that one up, Scotty. China shoots back at US spy balloon claims. Their foreign ministry said US high altitude balloons have violated Chinese airspace more than 10 times in the last year alone.
Exactly. So no big deal. And they never made a big hoo-ha about it, but America did this time. Someone within America made, with influence and control and within the US government, or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, beyond Biden and the White House's oversight, decided to make an issue of this. And they did. And Biden is being briefed on it every morning. He's waking up every morning, first thing in his mind. As soon as his mind boots up, like, which takes a while, the first thing that pops into his head is balloon. What about that balloon? Get me the CIA. Give me the Pentagon. How's that balloon thing going? What is it? It's a balloon, sir. All right. Keep me briefed. I'll be taking a nap here. Anyway, yeah, so that's that nonsense out of the way. In fact, on that point, do you want to hear a little quote? Do you know who Albert Camus is?
Oh, mais oui, he was a French philosopher.
Yes, French philosopher, author.
Existentialist.
Exactly. He had a good quote.
I think, therefore I am, but where am I?
Well,
I do not know.
Yeah. Every time I hear a political speech or I read those of our leaders, I am horrified at having, for years, heard nothing which sounded human.
Right.
It is always the same words telling the same lies. And the fact that men accept this, that the people's anger has not destroyed these hollow clowns, strikes me as proof that men attribute no importance to the way they're governed.
Touché.
Which is exactly what we're dealing with today. People do not care, apparently. The vast majority of them do not care that they're being run by a bunch of fucking liars and clowns. Because if they did, there would be mass demonstrations on the street, and they would do something about it, but they don't care.
Demonstrations, but yeah, the mass.
The ones that the small number of demonstrations of this, you know, in quantity and number of people, are quickly put down. In fact, that's actually something that was people talking about Canada as what do you call her, that lesbian in the White House. What's her French name?
Karine Jean-Pierre
Abdul-Jabbar.
No, Jean-Pierre.
That's he's a basketball player. She called Canada, and we have this thing called you know, it's like NORAD. It's like what is it? It's a you know, one of those.
Do you want to hear it?
Group things? Yeah.
I found this in.
This is an example of what you're doing. When Camus talks about clowns, and he was talking, you know, what, 50 years ago. He's, you know, it's just got worse since then. If it was that bad at his day.
It's just got worse. They've always had this kind of corporate speak that is bland deliberately because they keep things vague because they can, that way when later on when they're caught, it minimizes the chance of being caught in a lie. That's why they've learned to speak that way. Mm-hmm. But it gets worse as they actually do egregiously lie all the time. But sometimes it's not lying. It just sounds like this. It's just
babble.
It just becomes stupidity. Think about it now. This is the official White House press secretary. This is the equivalent of Dmitry Peskov in the United States. Speaking last week about the balloons.
Why is the American military shooting something out of the sky over Canada?
Because it's part of NORAD. There is the NORAD is part of like part of
the NORAD.
It's a what you call a coalition, a consortium,
pact of nations.
A pact,
okay.
Exactly. And so that's why we were able to do that. Again, we didn't do it on our own. We did it clearly in step with Canada.
Clearly, we did it in step with the Canada. The NORAD did the thing in step with the Canada, and I'm not a clown. So,
you know, someone was saying, they're probably right. This is the first time Americans, many of them, have heard the term NORAD since 9/11.
Yeah.
Canada is one thing. They've heard Canada before because that's like a feature of South Park. It's a running joke that you call it Canada. So she goofed there, but also the NORAD thing, they haven't heard of NORAD since 9/11.
Yeah.
Everyone knows NORAD was AWOL on 9/11.
It's not NORAD, it's the NORAD, according to her. The NORAD and the Canada work together.
It's this thing with us in Canada.
And
the White House press secretary, I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah. I meant to tell you all the, you know, inside details of what's going on in the White House, but I've no fucking clue how to say Canada. Just speaking of Canada, yesterday, Canadians were... they weren't happy yesterday or Friday when this came out. So there was a commission, a public commission supposedly, fair and balanced, unbiased, obviously, into last year's invoking of the Emergency Powers Act by the Trudeau government against the truckers, which is an example of the kind of demonstrations that, there aren't many of them, but
That was big, yeah.
it was fairly serious, and they had a public commission decide whether or not the invoking of the emergency powers in Canada to put down that protest
Was legal.
was justified. There was any problems with it. So the Canadian government basically investigated itself and said, "We're cool. It's all good. It was fine. What we did was fine." And of course, that involved freezing of people's accounts with, at least initially, no way for them, even if they said, "Okay, listen, I'm not freezing their bank accounts." And when they stopped the protest, they left a protest and just went back home. They still had their bank account frozen for sometimes for months afterwards. They had no way to actually get them unfrozen. Pretty serious. This is for people to buy food, right? They removed your ability to buy food because you were protesting. It's so anyway, a public commission announced Friday that Trudeau's government had met the very high threshold for invoking the Emergencies Act to quell the protest by truckers and other angry over Canada's COVID-19 restrictions last winter. Just scroll down a bit. Hundreds of thousands, for weeks, hundreds and sometimes thousands of protesters, of course, there's probably more than that, but anyway, in trucks and other vehicles clogged the streets of Ottawa, railing against vaccine mandates for truckers and other COVID-19 precautions and condemning Trudeau's Liberal government. Keep going. Justice Paul Rouleau concludes most of the emergency measures were appropriate. He said he does not accept the testimony of the protest organisers who described demonstrations as lawful and peaceful. The measures taken by the federal government were for the most part appropriate and effective and contributed to bringing a return to order without loss of life or serious injury to property. Which is, so his remit, obviously, it's interesting there. His remit was, did the emergency powers allow for the protest to be put down? Yes, they did. And therefore it was good. No mention at all of whether or not what people were protesting about was justified, and therefore the protest was justified, and therefore putting it down would have been unjustified. So there's no comment, no mention in these write-ups in this, or even in his report on it, his verdict on it, about whether or not the protesters were justified and whether or not their grievances should have been addressed. Of course, it's almost like automatically they were totally unjustified. There was no reason whatsoever for them to be protesting, and the Emergency Powers Act was necessary to put down a bunch of people who are protesting about something that they shouldn't have been protesting about in the first place. End of story. Thank you very much. Public commission, fair and balanced, free and democratic, all good. Bye-bye.
Camus was right about he was right about the politicians. But if he'd lived long enough, he'd have seen some serious protests. I mean, that one was insurrection, like the Yellow Vest. Though he's not right that people never... And they gave the government something they kind of had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It was either that or Trudeau was out, and at the very least, early elections, if not worse.
Yeah.
For the lion class. So
for sure, yeah. They were protecting themselves with emergency powers, with draconian totalitarian powers that were used and given to law enforcement to put down, in any country that makes claim to being a democratic, free, open society. Canada was not, and many other countries in the Western world were not, and particularly Canada, because it prolonged it for beyond all reason, right into last obviously through last winter and into last year, well into last year. And any country claiming to be a free and open and democratic society was, the people in that society, faced with what they were being subjected to for that length of time, were totally justified in protesting about it.
Yeah,
it's either admit that you're a bunch of totalitarian nut jobs, or if you still claim this is a free and open democratic society, then we're entitled to protest, and you should concede to our demands and reduce these ridiculous draconian totalitarian measures.
It's like Aaron Good said, "Who gets to decide the exception gets to rule."
Yeah,
that's why Trudeau, I mean, just this week as well, pontificating about freedom and justice elsewhere, maybe Russia, Ukraine, or something.
Mm.
He'll say it with a straight face, complain about others' lack of rights and freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And he squares that circle in his head because, well, ours is an exceptional case,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in charge.
Yeah.
So I'll lecture everyone else about the rule of law, but it doesn't apply to me because I get to decide the exception.
Yeah. There's like the COVID business, and there have been several other examples where governments, lesser examples where governments have, in Western countries, Western supposedly democratic, free, open societies, have declared an emergency that was, overblown, exaggerated, not the kind of emergency that they said it was, whether it be a health emergency or a social, like a kind of a security emergency. And they've used that to dabble with totalitarian policies, totalitarian control over the population. And they can do that whenever they want. They can declare any, you can imagine that these people sit around and, or they have people sitting around coming up with ways that they can justify declaring another emergency and then, locking the country down in one way or another, or controlling people's freedom in one way or another. And there's nothing you can do about it. You have to simply believe them when they say, because they're the authority, they have all the information, they have all the science, they have all the knowledge, right? So you have to believe what they say. If they say there's an emergency about X, then you have to believe that there really is a deadly threat, or some kind of serious threat to the population, and you have to do what they say. I mean, it's.
Well, Canada's case was particularly bad because in other countries they've since had constitutional rulings which declared all of the pandemic response measures illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Look at this one. This is from a ruling made in the highest court in Spain last summer. Spain's top court rules lockdown unconstitutional. It didn't just do that. If the second paragraph, the ruling leaves the door open. I don't know if this has been followed up, but the ruling leaves the door open for people who are fined for breaking the rules to reclaim the money they paid.
Oh yeah, that's happening in most other European countries, where all of the fines that people were holding out on not paying the fines that were imposed on them for breaking lockdown or whatever, breaking lockdown rules, they haven't paid them. They were eventually cancelled. I mean, that's the case I know in the UK and in France, and I think it's obviously, I think that was passed in Spain as well. So most European countries just said, okay, yeah, all that policing and fining of people, and even in some cases detaining people or arresting people, were all not illegal, basically.
Yeah,
there's no
in the United States, state courts, New York, ruled that the firing of people was illegal, that everyone was entitled to get their position back and back pay.
Yeah.
Later on in that, it says that it was a close call. Spain's constitutional court said in a statement that it had voted by a slim majority of 6-5 to find that the state of emergency was not enough to give the restrictions constitutional backing. This is because the rules were equivalent to a suppression of fundamental rights. In order to legally limit people's freedoms to the extent they did in 2020, the court said the government would have had to declare a state of exception, which is, again, that word exception, rather than a state of emergency. So that's interesting on several levels, because it means that within Spain's constitution, there is a means, and the government lawyers in 2020 would have known that. You can declare a state of they have 3 states. They have state of alarm. Maybe there's been a terror attack. Then there's state of emergency, and then state of exception. So exception is exclusively when the integrity of the state is at threat. Will Spain continue to exist as a nation state?
It's a threat to the government.
It's the highest possible one, and they didn't invoke that when they invoked. They specifically went to the mid-level. I think because the lawyers knew at the time that this won't last forever, and it'll be enough. Because if we try to invoke exception, we'll fail and we won't get any measures passed. That kind of thing was going on, where they built that into their decisions. Not just Spain, but I presume other European countries. They went ahead with lockdowns and punitive measures, knowing that they were illegal, but that when they were finally ruled against a year or two later, it wouldn't matter. It would be over by then. Job done.
There can be situations where there's no threat to the population, but there's a threat to the state, right?
Yeah,
a serious threat to the existence of the government. And by threat to the state or threat to the government, you mean threat to the individuals in government. Like there's someone, but increasingly, it's in these times, it's likely that that the two will kind of blend in a sense where the threat to the state comes from the threat, there's a threat to the state, but no threat to the people, because the threat to the state comes from the people themselves, right? And then you can invoke, which is weird, because technically in their officially in democratic societies, the threat to the government is by implication a threat to the country as a whole, including the population. So we're all in this together, right? We're all the same. Government, we're your servants after all, right? You elect us as your servants. We're public servants. We serve you. So any threat to us would be a threat to you, obviously, because if the government falls in, the state falls apart, nobody can organize. Put it this way: if the government collapsed, say the government was, raided by a bunch of whoever, and all taken, put in prison, thrown in dungeons, who would collect the garbage?
The garbage men.
No, Neil, the government does that.
Tell that to Belgium, which survived for 2 years without a government and functioned perfectly. In fact, tax receipts went up.
Right.
Things functioned better.
That was just an
without
anomaly.
the government.
That was an anomaly. So obviously the point is that these emergency powers and measures are designed more increasingly in these times in the modern, postmodern era, in the 21st century anyway. These emergency powers are increasingly used to protect government from actions of the population or potential actions of the population. Very often they invoke them in order to head off what they see as potential disgruntled citizens or an entire disgruntled population from rising up and getting rid of the government. So they'll move before that, to keep people contained, because you don't want to wait until they're at the gates of Parliament, right? You don't want to wait until there's 1 million people standing outside government buildings and then say, okay, send in the troops, Then you get a V for Vendetta situation, maybe, that scene at the end of V for Vendetta, or Stand Down or whatever. Anyway, so they're trying all the time to keep people controlled and cowed and in fear, and in that sense reliant on government, to keep them enthralled to government, thinking that government is there to protect them and keep them safe. And therefore anything the government does in terms of controlling restricting your freedoms is for your own benefit. Eventually maybe people will see through this eventually, but it's getting very transparent even for the average intelligence person. It should be fairly transparent at this point that these people are out to protect themselves, not to look after or care for you.
It set a precedent, because this, late last year, banks in Brazil were ordered to start freezing the accounts of protest organizers against their election results in October.
Yeah,
and there's no follow up. Maybe if I could, research in Portuguese, I might find stuff. But there's a basic blackout in English language media about what's the status with what's going on there. You can see from their perspective, though, how it was a threat to the state, and it would be an exceptional circumstance. Basically, you've got possibly a majority. The theory is that they contest the election result, i.e. a majority did not vote for Lula. So in theory, you've got a majority of people either on the streets or in support of those in the streets, and they want the government out. Right there, you have a threat to the government. Whether you disagree with their premise or not, what's invoked to justify freezing their accounts is, well, we have to stay in power.
Right.
Because we're the democratically elected government, so we've no choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of creepy how that was the second instance in which this occurred,
Mm-hmm.
And there it wasn't about a COVID response and vaccine mandate protest. It was more like the nuts and bolts of democracy. It was a contested election for who would be the national leader of a country.
Mm-hmm.
Probably going to see more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Maybe not. Maybe this is going to be effective, though, and it's going to have suppressing effects. That's what they hope. This is how their theory of social nudging works.
Yeah.
If we do this at least a few times, we'll contain. There won't be knock-on domino effects elsewhere. People will think twice about contesting their elections. They'll just start to accept whatever the results are, like people would have in Soviet places.
Right. And just not believe it, but
not believe it, but keep the head down.
Yeah. They just they
keep the head down, or you don't eat.
Yeah,
that might be effective. It might win them over.
Yeah, they become basically disassociated in a certain sense from society in a certain sense, where in terms of the contract, the social contract between people and government, that becomes broken, and people just go, listen, it's a joke.
Totally broken.
Yeah.
It's broken.
You,
as an aside, we were wondering last week, you were saying something like, I think most Americans are basically for Ukraine against Russia in that issue. There was a poll this week, AP poll.
Yeah.
I think it surprised the legacy media. Let's have a look at the result. Didn't surprise me. But even if we allow for two things, a margin of error on the one hand, but on the other side, remember, it's an AP poll, so they're going to try and poll the right people. They still got a result not in their favor. Just 48% of respondents in a new AP poll agree with continuing to send weaponry to Kiev.
Yeah, there's that 48%, around the 50% mark, I'm always suspicious of any poll that shows the country divided in two. Because it's perfect,
I know.
I mean, it's like, okay, that poll basically means nobody can do anything, because the average person who reads it, whatever side they're on, whether they're supportive of Ukraine or supportive of, or against Ukraine, against supporting Ukraine, they say, well, more or less half of the people in my society don't think like I think. Therefore, that's democracy, right? We all just got to learn to live with each other. So let's just, and then the other side are saying the same, It's always dodgy. Like, I mean, I've always been suspicious of like political polls and, election results. In countries where it's like, and I mean, I allow for the fact that, yeah, there's in most Western countries, there's two dominant parties, like left and right, and that most people would just jump on, I'm left or I'm right, whatever, they have a history or tradition of doing that. But I don't know. Yeah, I can understand how you might end up with that, but I always think that they're massaged in some way or other, that they always want to keep it at 51-49, 50 and a half, 49 and a half.
Yeah.
It's weird. Anyway, I suppose we'll never really know. So you were talking earlier on about yesterday. Give us a bit of a history there on this time last year, what was going on?
Well, this very weekend last year, we'd been sick of 2 months of headlines, usually from American media. Russia's going to invade, nonstop for 2 months, and we were just sick of it. So this weekend last year, we were like, is anything going to happen? Maybe, probably not, though. I think we watered down. There had been one little development just before the Duma, Russian Parliament, had put a proposal to Putin saying it's time to recognize Donetsk and Lugansk as independent republics, and he had officially said no. 24 hours later was the Monday 21st, and he did, and that surprised people. Surprised me a bit, because we're like, after 8 years, he's gonna which meant that 3 days later,
well, I think,
Russian
if I remember, although
it's 24th,
it's a year ago, but if I remember correctly, I think we were thinking that Russia would eventually recognize, not right now, but fairly soon, would soon recognize the independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, but that wouldn't necessarily lead to an invasion or war. I mean, it would be a political thing where, like, we recognize them and let's see how it plays out. Let's see what happens as a result, but we didn't expect it to be boom, recognize them, and then boom, the next day or basically a couple of days later, the invasion, But,
Putin surprised Russians by saying no before the weekend, and then Monday televised speech, saying he does.
Saying he had a good think about it over the weekend.
Something like that. This may be related to another thing that's happened this week that happened at the same time last year, was the Munich Security Conference. Zelensky returned from that Munich Security Conference last February with gloats about how Ukraine was going to start looking to arm itself with nuclear weapons. And that may have been the signal for Putin to go, I need to make a decision of some type now. And then between February 21st and the 24th, it was probably had already decided to do both things, to recognize and to roll out. But it's interesting because 8 years to the day-ish, on February 22nd, 2014, Yanukovych was on the phone to Putin. Putin said, you know, you could be in trouble here. And Yanukovych was saying, no, it's fine. I've just signed a deal with the opposition spokespeople on the Maidan, brokered by the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and Poland. And we've agreed. They're getting everything they wanted. I'm leaving by October. There will be fresh elections. And that's it. It's fine. It'll be fine. And Putin's like, there's something else afoot here. Sniper fire starts on the 22nd. Yanukovych is on his way in convoy by car to Kharkov for a regular political meeting. It was nothing exceptional. It was planned, a normal conference or something in the East. And he gets wind that his residence, as the sniper fire starts in the Maidan, that his residence has been raided by Azov types. And he's like, shit. And that's when he realizes they're gunning for him. They're looking for him, Putin says, okay, make your way to the coast, wherever. And we'll have, and this is what happened. They had Russian special forces land and intercept him, maybe in Crimea or just near it, take him to Crimea, and then from there to Russia. That was February 22nd. February 24th, or maybe that was February 24th, I'm not sure. I think February 24th, the decision was made by Crimea's regional parliament to break away,
referendum,
to succeed from Ukraine. Secede. And I presume, I'm not sure, but I presume the decision, simultaneous decision in Moscow was like, well, we're going to have to back this up with force, or the 22,000 Ukrainian soldiers who are stationed in Crimea could do something. Either to our troops who were there already, or whatever. So it wasn't on the 24th that the troops, the polite green men, were sent in, but it probably was decided on that day. And I think that day is fixed in Putin's memory. As a that was the crossing of his Rubicon. And that's how it lined up last year as well.
He jumped forward 9 years.
There were two other things that kind of decided it.
8 years.
In 2014, the closing ceremony of the Sochi Winter Olympics was on the 23rd. And you can imagine he didn't want to do anything right there. He wanted that to be out of the way. So it had been a very successful, against all the Western bullshit propaganda, it was a very successful Olympics, and he wanted to put it to bed. Similarly, last year, supposedly China said to Russia, look, we can see you're about to do something, but for God's sake, can you hold off till the 24th? And maybe he agreed.
Yeah, the whole thing was very fluid, because as you mentioned previously, there's, it's a matter at this point of official record that there was about 150,000 Ukrainian troops amassed on the border of Donbass.
In 2014, yes.
No, in 2022.
Also, I read in a review of it, at least that's what the Wikipedia page says, they had 150,000 on standby at the time as well. Because they weren't sure what would happen when they sent some contingents into Crimea. Will they start shooting each other? The 22,000 Ukrainians who are stationed there, they didn't. They surrendered peacefully.
They surrendered. So it was the Crimea thing preempted at that point. It would have been small, because in 2014 the Ukrainian military wasn't prepared for any kind of a large-scale offensive or large-scale conflict with Russia, and Russia could have obviously, even though it was unprepared then as well, it would have been able to push back against that. Not excluding the separatists in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, right? So Ukraine in 2014 wasn't ready to invade. They spent the next 8 years. They spent the next, because a lot of things happened at that time. The rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk basically said, we want no part of this new government, and we want independence, and we're kind of breaking away. We're declaring it now. Okay, it's not official, but we're declaring it now. And that's when the 8 years of Ukraine then just waged this so-called anti-terrorist operation against the people in Donbass. But I don't think there was much. They weren't in a position. The Ukrainians weren't in a position to do anything.
Putin wasn't sure of that, though.
Exactly,
he wasn't sure. And there's separately in a biography I've been reading about the time, there's discussions of what went on in the Kremlin, and even Sergei Shoigu was like, "Okay, but we've no contingency plan for this. We're just going to have to play it by ear." that Putin had taken a risk. And that was possibly why they had their nuclear forces on standby as well. They were like, well, what's going to happen? Nothing happened.
Yeah. Well,
Thank God. But
it's interesting that they didn't do anything in Donbass, but they did something in Crimea. They moved straight away to secure Crimea because they knew Crimea was, strategically very important for the Russian Black Sea Fleet there. And this new government that was the coup government installed effectively by the Americans, by the State Department, they could have caused some problems in Crimea. So they went to Crimea and said, we got to secure Crimea and secure the Black Sea Fleet port. So, but in Donbass, well, there's nothing serious going to happen there. There's enough military personnel in Donetsk and Luhansk to kind of like hold their own in a certain sense. And the Ukrainians aren't in a position to really do anything large scale, i.e. invade Donetsk and Luhansk. And that's why they spent the next 8 years just basically lobbing artillery shells at them and killing about 15,000 people over those 8 years.
Yeah. That only kicked off in May when
a couple of months
Turkey
later.
knows.
Yeah.
Remember him?
Yeah, Turkey knows.
The guy who just said, I'm now the speaker of the Rada in Kiev. He declared the anti-terror operation. That was 3 months later.
Yeah. So, and that leads up to 2022. And like you said, this time last year, Munich Security Conference, wait until the Chinese Olympics were done, and then they move in. And then back to today, we have the Munich Security Conference again, and the great and the good, the best bullshitters the West has to offer all showed up and said some interesting things. Again, the vast majority of this stuff is just talk, basically talking things up. They talk a really good game, but then when you look at the details, they're not following through on it, because they know they don't have to. They do the bare minimum in order to keep the whole thing going. In fact, if you look at this, this is just in the context of the Munich Security Conference. This is Borrell. This is Jungle Man. Jungle Boy.
No, he's the gardener.
Oh, sorry. Who?
He's the gardener.
Oh, yeah. Well, whatever.
All the darkies are in
He
the
knows
jungle.
about the jungle, though.
Yeah.
This is him in that context. Actually, he's speaking at the Munich Security Conference. He says, the Ukraine war is over unless the EU boosts military support. The war in Ukraine will be over unless the EU finds a way in weeks to speed up the provision of ammunition to Ukraine, Borrell, EU Foreign Affairs Chief, warned. On the final day of the Munich Security Conference.
He went on to say, I'm going from memory here, or unless you want to play it.
No.
Maybe he says it or not. He wants to impress how urgent it is. They need it now. Yeah. But he also says they have enough weapons. We just need ammo. Yeah. But we're running out of ammo, so we need to just bump up industry.
Just scroll down. Just I'll do it later. There, he said in the third paragraph there, we are in urgent mode. This shortage of ammunition. Oh well, just the paragraph above. He said a special meeting of the EU defence ministers for 8th to 9th of March will provide a chance for countries to offer ammunition from their existing stocks. Adding it is taking up to 10 months for European armies to order and receive a single bullet. We are in urgent mode, he said. This shortage of ammunition has to be solved quickly. It is a matter of weeks. He said, if it was not, the war would be over. And God forbid that the war would be over, people. I mean, how are Ukrainians going to keep dying? How are Russians going to keep dying? Mostly Ukrainians, but Russians too. And how is the garden going to keep itself pristine
if it's not killing darkies and non-Europeans?
If the arms manufacturers aren't making a crap load of money. Anyway, yeah. So that was him, and then you have Rishi, Golden Boy, Rishi Sunak, only in the job, UK Prime Minister, a couple of months. Doesn't really know what he's talking about, but he'll say stuff anyway. This is him in his actual... So they all give a little speech, whatever. And you just play that.
We need a military strategy for Ukraine to gain a decisive advantage on the battlefield, to win the war, and a political strategy to win the peace. To win the war, Ukraine needs more artillery, armoured vehicles and air defence. So now is the moment to double down on our military support.
get ready
When
to pause
Putin
near the end.
started this war, he gambled that our resolve would falter. Even now, he is betting that we will lose our nerve. But we proved him wrong then.
Check it there.
And we will prove...
Pause. And we prove him wrong now. To thunderous applause from, about 50 people.
Yes, but 50, very important.
And can you make that bigger? Because there's an interesting person there that, no, you can't. Anyway, will you see the center, front, from our perspective, front, center? There's 3 guys there in a kind of diagonal line. The third guy along, who's that? Who is that, Neil?
He's got glasses on, right?
Who is that?
Oh, your man, Tedros.
It's Ted Ross himself, your old friend Tedros, sitting in the front row at the Munich Security Conference. He's the head of the World Health Organization. What's he doing at the Munich Security Conference? Does he just like guns and hearing about war in Ukraine or something? Should he not be over in a lab looking for the next pandemic coming our way? And there'll be somebody else. We'll see in a minute. I don't like to subject you all to more of Rishi Sunak, but this was talked about as being, again, it's kind of waffle to a large extent in terms of the way they say it, but this is his official statement about what the UK is going to provide for the Ukraine to keep the war going, because ending the war would be terrible.
From Russian bombs and Iranian drones. And that's why the United Kingdom will be the first country to provide Ukraine with longer-range weapons. And it's why we're working with our allies to give Ukraine the most advanced air defense systems and build the air force they need to defend their nation. But to win the peace, we also need to rebuild the international order on which our collective security depends. First, that means upholding international law. The whole world must hold Russia to account. We must see justice through the ICC for their sickening war crimes committed. Whether
ICC.
in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, or beyond. And Russia must also be held to account for the terrible destruction it has inflicted.
On whoever else, I can't think of who now, but other people as well. ICC, International Criminal Court. And then
we must uphold the international order by continuing to kiss America's ass.
Yes, exactly, because America is the international order, and without it, we are lost. And here's your friend, another friend of yours.
No, not more. Oh, Jesus.
I'm sorry again to subject you to this, but we have to listen to it because...
It's like a bus. It's like a bus, and there's Wi-Fi on.
It's like an electric bus. Ukraine is like an electric bus. Let's hear what Camel herself has to say.
And there is no doubt.
Nice and slow.
These are crimes against humanity.
Yeah. What were they again?
The United States has formally determined.
Formally determined, the United States has.
That Russia has committed crimes against humanity.
Didn't you say that? But it's
and
okay,
I
United
say,
States. What do you say?
To all those who have perpetrated these crimes.
You will be held accountable.
And to their superiors.
And to
who
their
are
descendants.
Complicit in these crimes. You will be held to account.
By me.
In the face of these indisputable
keep
facts,
it together. Indisputable facts.
Here in Munich,
here in
let us renew
America's backyard.
Our commitment to accountability. Let us renew our commitment to the rule of law.
Unipolar world order.
See, they had to give it to her. Give it on the what do you call it, the teleprompter. Had to give it to her very slowly, because she has a tendency whenever she just talks like, normally or whatever, to get a bit hysterical and start laughing and giggling at the wrong point, about anything and everything, So just look, Kamala, just read it super slow, take long pauses between each word, and then you'll be less likely to bust out laughing or giggle like a hysterical freak at inappropriate times. Just say it super slow. Just read it super slow. I know you have no idea what you're talking about, but read it super slow. It's the same as Rishi Sunak. Like, he's 2 months in the job. He's a financier. He's a London Stock Exchange kind of guy. Married into lots of Indian money. Has no idea. He wouldn't know one end of a bullet from the other, right? Or one end of a. But he knows what kind of artillery, because that's what they told me. You know, like they told me to read this thing about artillery and planes and stuff. And I hear in war you need planes and missiles and stuff like that. And those are the things that I have determined. Just like Kamala there has determined that Russia has committed war crimes. Rishi has determined that in a war, a country fighting a war needs some bullets and guns and shit. So we are committed to doing that to make sure that the war does not end.
You get a real sense of the intellectual level of West and East when you compare those speeches with Putin's 2007 speech at the same conference. Go back and listen to it. It's like multi-level, complex, philosophical history making. It was the first time anyone had used the term multipolar world order in a political speech. The Russians and the Chinese have been discussing it as a concept on a bilateral basis, but none of them had stepped up and said, very clear. This is how it's going to be for all of us going forward. At some point, Putin stepped down a year later, and so it kind of went away and only came back with him in 2012. But the gulf is just, it's night and day. A lot of Westerners are at least aware that they're being spoken to as if they're 5-year-olds because, like Camus said, they're listening to liars. Right.
What's good though is that even though they're a bunch of clowns and liars and self-absorbed narcissists, they can't help but kind of reveal certain things at the same time, you know what I mean? Because all they talk is ideology. They just have this ideology which serves their own personal and group interest. So they'll say some things that they otherwise wouldn't. That you would never hear, like on the other side, like Russian politicians, at least Putin and others like that. You never had them stating such, technically political faux pas, or coming across as being aggressive, coming across as being what people accuse them of being, which is like just aggressive warmongers, you know what I mean? And in fact, having planned this all along, and they're thereby exposing the fact that they're liars when they say, like, for example, Russia started this war, and then they'll say stuff that exposes the fact that that's not actually true, because they can't help themselves.
Yeah, we've been training them all since 2014.
Yeah, exactly. But Russia started this war. We trained an army to kind of like invade Russia. But this is, so after the actual bullshit speech they all give, like for 5 minutes or something, the ones who are asked, like Sunak and the great and the good, they then have a open discussion, if you know what I mean. They sit there with another person, they get asked some questions, open mic, supposedly, and the audience gets to ask the odd question as well. Anyway, here's Rishi. Going back to Rishi, he says something quite interesting in his little chat with the moderator. She's probably a reporter or something, I don't know. Anyway, go from there. So he's asked a question.
What are we waiting for, would be my pitch. So now's the moment to act. Now, with regard to stockpiles, I think that, again, the pitch I would make to people is to remember, what do we have those stockpiles for? Right? If you're a European nation and you have this equipment, you have to ask yourself, what was it there to defend against? Right? What was it there to do? And if one of those stockpiles is now helping to degrade a Russian tank, well, isn't that precisely what it would have been used for? You had it in your stockpile for. So I don't think you should necessarily see every bit of depletion of stockpiles as somehow a negative that is a problem. It's actually, well, hang on, that's what the purpose of these things were. So our security, even as the stockpiles might be depleted, if they're degrading Russian armed forces, they are increasing our security at the same way. So that's one way to think a little bit about the stockpiles. But it's right that we do need to replenish them in the UK. We've provided...
Pause.
Oh, look who it is.
Sitting there, lapping it up.
She's in
for
retirement.
The children. She's there for the children herself. For the children. For the children. For the children. Yes. Why are you in Munich?
You know what? I know why she's there. She's there because she can decide which stocks stock tips to send Paul.
Yeah. She's just there for the stock tips.
Raytheon, buy Raytheon.
Yeah. But interesting point there.
Very interesting. So what's the point in why do we all have an army to begin with?
Why do we have
why were we all
stockpiles
in
of
NATO
weapons?
to begin with?
Right.
This was always what it was for.
Right. Okay, he's talking about stockpiles that have been there for years.
Decades.
In some case, decades. And he said, European countries, what did you have your stockpiles for anyway if it wasn't to kill Russians? Like, I mean, you stockpiled this stuff going back 10, 20 years, right? We all know it was to kill Russians. So let's use it. Who's complaining that we're using it to kill Russians, that we're depleting it? What else are you going to deplete it on? You're going to just, what was it, for somebody,
Al-Qaeda?
An invasion from the jungle or something?
Right. Yeah.
The invasion from the jungle is happening under our watch. It's the economic immigrants coming in that we're allowing into the country, and obviously you're not going to use your weapons on them. They're very welcome. These stockpiles of weapons were always for Russia, going back a long time. We all knew it. We all knew it was going to happen one day. We made it happen because that's what we had planned all along. You know, you see where people get into conspiracy theories. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you could challenge him with that and say, well, are you saying that in the back of everybody in every European political leader's mind was the idea that the stockpiles of weapons in European countries, their armed forces, to the extent that they were in any state of readiness or able to actually fight, were always going to be for
killing Russians?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm saying. Okay, so would that imply then that you may have in some way provoked this conflict? Do you know what I mean? If I'm like, you know, because that's, you know what I mean? You certainly have signaled that to the Russians. The Russians would have picked up on that. You know what I mean? If that was a prevailing attitude for a long time in Europe, that these weapons were designed to fight an ultimate war against Russia, then surely the Russians picked up on that. And therefore, could it not be said that you're the one who actually provoked this war, rather than what you just said, Russia started this war? And Kamala said Russia started this war. You're lying, aren't you, Mr. Sunak? No.
No. They started the war. On stockpiles, something that's always been said about Putin even by all his enemies. When they go to meet him, they're astonished by how well briefed he is about everything. Compare that with Sunak here. This is Sunak's defense minister this week. Sunak saying, just go and check out your stockpile, see what you got, send it on to Ukraine. Well, his defense minister did that. Remember all the hoopla about the tanks?
Yeah.
West lacks operational tanks for Kiev. UK Defense Secretary. Armies have been hollowed out over the last 3 decades, Ben Wallace said.
Let's just send non-operational tanks in, no? If we don't have operational
So
ones.
what they did was, after all that hoopla and the political agreement to send tanks, they went to the generals and said, okay, open up the warehouse and see what we've got. And they
see
found,
if we've got what we promised you we were going to send.
In a Saturday interview with Der Spiegel, Wallace noted that Germany organized a meeting with his NATO. That's when they all agreed, yeah, we're going to send about 100, whatever. That's when the problems became obvious. The political decision is there. The politicians sent their military to the depots only to find that their tanks are not operational or repaired for delivery to Ukraine.
According to Wallace, NATO has to face the painful truth that our armies have been more or less hollowed out over the last 30 years. There are numbers of how many tanks each country has, but then there is the reality that tells us that far too few of them are operational. So basically, this is Europe and the US using the lifeblood of Ukrainian manhood, basically, to just throw them at the Russian military to try and with the intent of, in some way or other, causing a problem for Russia. Killing Russian soldiers, doesn't matter if it's like 7-8 to 1, you know, Ukrainian to Russian. It doesn't matter, as long as you get some Russians, as long as you keep Russia embroiled in some kind of conflict, as long as, and this is the thing, over the past 15 years at least, if you remember, this is just a continuum of the continuation of it, which is demonizing Russia. More than anything else, this war is not meant to be won. It's not going to end. The West, the US doesn't, you know, expect or hope for an actual victory, or Russia being forced to surrender and come to terms and all that kind of stuff and sign some kind of treaty that's anti-Russian. They don't expect any of that. This is simply a continuation of the long term, as we've talked about many times going back most of those 15 years, of a Western policy of demonizing Russia in the eyes of the West, the international community, quote unquote, in order to, in some way, sideline it and split the world in two, create a new Cold War de facto, some delusional plan they have for a new version of not Putin's multipolar world, but some new kind of world order where the West is separated from the rest.
If there's one continuity with the Cold War, and even before that, it's to bring Russia to heel. It's to bring Russia into the Western fold on Western terms. Putin was all game for that when he, in his first term.
But not on Western terms.
He said, he even suggested to Bill Clinton, well, what if we join NATO? And Bill was like, yeah. And his advisors were like, no, because they'll come in and they'll water down the mission. And we can't tell them what the mission is, because then that's a secret. The mission is now clear 20 years later. The mission is to bring Russia to heel. The only person who made any sense at this year's Munich conference was Macron, again. Even there, he's deluded, but you get a sense of, he thinks this is a new and novel idea. This is what they wanted to do when they had Yeltsin in charge in the 90s. You're 30 years too late, Macron. So he talked about, we have to, he has the same party line, we have to defeat Russia, but not crush it. He said a military red line for us should be not encouraging Ukrainians to attack Russia proper. I do not think, as some people do, that we must aim for a total defeat of Russia. Those observers want to, above all else, crush Russia. That has never been the position of France, and it will never be our position. He goes on to say, we need, basically, he's the only non-hawk there, and it's all relative. He wants peace. He recognizes that Russia is European, and he wants to bring them back into the fold, you know. But it's like I said, it could have happened in the 90s, but that is long gone after everything that's been done to and around Russia since then. And the intransigent thing, the Russians are a problem, so to speak. They don't submit. They won't accept your globalist world order because they know that the globalist banner is really unipolar. It's Washington, and everyone else gets the scraps. There can be there's no equal partners here, you know. There's one other thing of note at the MSC. We have to wait and see, but the Chinese foreign minister was there, Wang Yi. He gave a short speech similarly to Macron's peace, and he announced that China would launch an explicit peace plan on the anniversary of the war. So that's upcoming February 24th. He didn't say what it was, but supposedly he's there talking to Europeans, sounding them out for their support about it. On the issue you mentioned just before of whether they think they can really win this or not, I don't know. I don't know what to think. In the space of 3 days, this is the top military man in the United States, Mark Milley. He gave exactly the opposite statement. So this is the first one earlier last week.
Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically, and they are paying an enormous price on the battlefield. But until Putin ends his war of choice, the international community will continue to support Ukraine with the equipment and capabilities it needs to defend itself.
Blah, blah, blah.
We are collectively supporting Ukraine's ability to defend its territory, protect its citizens.
It's lost. It's over. You know, it's done. But we're just cleaning up here. 3 days later, he gives an interview to the Financial Times. There's likely to be no military winner in Ukraine.
He just said they lost, though. He just said Russia lost. Again, people don't. We've tried to impress
What was it Camus said about politicians?
Yeah, we've tried to impress upon people just how much propaganda is a major part of any conflict, you know, and it's about convincing the population that they're on the winning side, basically. Even when you're losing, you tell them that you're winning, you know?
So that they maintain faith in the institutions.
Yeah, I mean, propaganda, like information, the information war is extremely important, you know, and it's obvious that it is. I mean, information war is like you're in an information war when you watch TV, you know. If you watch commercials on TV, you know, watch adverts on TV.
If only for your attention.
Yeah, it's for your attention to get you to think and believe certain things and then act on those beliefs, you know. So it absolutely has. You know, that's what people don't understand. The lies are part of the war. You know, there's offensives of lying, basically. You know, to try and to get people to convince people that something is happening in a certain way, because then that will lead people to act in a certain way. It's a very basic level. It keeps up public support. Let's say, yes, we're doing the right thing in Ukraine. Ukraine's defending democracy for Europe, democracy for the whole world. You know, get on board
to maintain the collective myth that our way of life is the best. It's better than theirs. Yeah. Therefore, we should remain in power.
Right.
And don't you ever do the unthinkable and start thinking that maybe we should be removed from power. It's incredible how much of it's actually domestic. And Putin has said this countless times, that when it comes to, like, all through Russiagate, he's like asked to comment on it, you know, asked to deny any Russian involvement in election interference for the nth time. He's like, look, no, I'm not involved. This is irrelevant. This is American domestic politics projected outwards. It's nothing to do with me. It's only Washington politics, which was. You know? Yeah. Even in war, at least at this sort of relatively low intensity level, right, where it's not actually head-on collision between two major countries, it's still domestic politics playing out. And I suppose over the longer term, they maintain a kind of quasi-strategy or hope that actually Macron, we didn't include this, Macron addressed this specifically as well. There's still the ever-present wishful thinking that if we maintain the pressure on Russia in whatever form, just throw them the old tanks and 16-year-old conscripts, whatever, and mercenaries from Colombia, just even ISIS. There's a few ISIS flags that popped up in Ukraine the last week. Whatever, just throw everything at it. If we get enough Russian soldiers killed, enough Russian families will be upset, and pressure will percolate upwards, and maybe down the road, if not for removing Putin, it'll remove the whole attitude that comes with that type of regime. They hold out for that. Maybe they don't bank on it today, but that it's part of the endless, almost messianic mission to bring Russia to heel. It's a century old, you know. It's deluded because it's deluded for many reasons, but Russia's just too far away culturally. They don't understand the psychology there is the opposite. The pressure Putin is actually coming under domestically is the reverse. The Russian people want them to get it done, go massive, smack NATO if you have to. That's the pressure he's under. It's not the way they imagine it's happening, you know.
It's all a sideshow to a large extent. That's what people don't realize, that it's all a sideshow. It's going somewhere. I mean, it's on a trajectory, and the conflict in Ukraine and all the talk of, you know, possible nuclear war and Third World War and all that kind of stuff is all that's a sideshow part of it. This actual conflict in Ukraine is on a continuum from, let's say, we can put it back as far as you want in a certain sense, but go back to 2001, 9/11, the 9/11 attacks, and come forward from there and watch all the events and the degradation of society and the way the world, particularly the Western world, but by the world, by extension, the world in general, has gone, and it's not going in a good direction, and it's continuing on it will continue on that downward trajectory. And the Ukraine conflict is just part of that kind of the pathology that has taken over within politics, global politics, and particularly in Western politics. It's just an incident that is a direct result of the pathological types of people, essentially, you know, some kind of character disturbed, psychopathic type individuals in positions of power in Western countries will always cause situations like this, will always lead to chaos and destruction. And the conflict in Ukraine is just an outplaying of that. And there's more to come. Of course, each of those, every time they act in a certain psychopathic way, as in provoking Russia into conflict in Ukraine, it has wider, it has an impact on it helps to push things further down the on the downward trajectory.
Global food supplies,
food supply, energy
that was
supply,
an
all that kind of stuff.
unforeseen issue.
It's all going in the direction of screwing up the lives of hundreds and hundreds of billions of people, screwing their lives and their livelihoods up and making life increasingly unbearable for those people. So
to maintain faith in the rules-based order.
Well, maintain faith in their own positions of power and influence. That's all they're in it for, is to continue on, to perpetuate their own positions of power and influence. It's purely self-interest on their part. And this is the outplaying or the manifestation. This one example, just like I said, it goes back to 9/11. Everything that's happened in between can all be tracked back to an outplaying of their supreme narcissism.
A global drama, all for the privilege of a few.
Right.
Which has its mirror image in the whole transgender woke thing.
Yeah.
A few causing such massive social issues, disharmony and so on.
Here's a case in point.
My rights.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly that. And here's a case in point from yesterday. This is a video. It's just, I'll tell you what it's about now. At the time, it was just published yesterday. It was... it's a shopping centre, just a scene outside a shopping centre in the La Défense district. It's a shopping mall district in Paris, a suburb of Paris, essentially, or an area of Paris. And it's a shopping mall, and people running out of it, screaming and shouting. And you wonder what's happening. You think, oh, well, they're acting as if there's some kind of an active shooter going on inside, or some kind of a shooting, which is part of the... Right, that's just how life is these days, right? There's active shooters all the time, and people know how to respond. That's an example of the degradation of society that has happened, let's say, over the past 20 or so years, where people respond in this way.
Responses.
Yeah, like hysterical responses. And what they're actually responding to, did you play it? Yeah. What they're actually responding to is... yeah. I mean, the audio isn't necessary. They're just people running out of the mall. But what actually happened inside is that, because it's a multi-story shopping mall, some guy got up, and that's you can make a comment on that, or that's a commentary on society in itself. Some guy threw himself off one of the upper levels inside a shopping mall and killed himself. So he threw himself off and landed down with a bit of a bang,
loud
a
noise,
kind of thump, crack, noise, whatever. And that caused all these people to sprint out of the shopping mall, not because they saw someone commit suicide, because they thought it was some kind of it was a loud noise, and that was enough to spook them and cause mass, like, contagion of panic, and them all to sprint out of the shop, like hundreds of people running out of a shopping mall because some guy committed suicide. That's a disturbing thing to see, obviously, but you go back, 30 years, I'm pretty sure that wouldn't happen to someone. People don't flee en masse from somebody who's just committed suicide. They're horrified, they're kind of like disturbed or whatever, but they don't run as if their lives are in danger from somebody having committed suicide. And that is an example of the kind of things I'm talking about, the outplaying of psychopathology among people in positions of power in the Western world, and what they have done to society, the effects they have on society, because them running out of that mall is a direct effect of terror attacks, of Islamic terrorism, which, of course, I go back to 9/11, America launching its global war on Muslim terrorism. And they go and invade 5-6 different countries, bomb, occupy multiple Muslim countries, kill hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, in fact, over the course of those 20 years. And then there's this, we're not getting into the details of that, but obviously the response, nominally, officially, is terror attacks happening beginning, when did they start? I don't know, around 2000. Major terror attacks in Western.
Well, after
2005,
2004, Madrid,
London bombings 2005,
unofficially
7/7, 2005,
unofficially Toulouse,
the
same month, remember?
Right? Yeah, and then multiple ones since then, and then shootings at concert halls, Ariana Grande, multiple terror plots and terror attacks, mass shootings in America. I mean, that is all of those things that have created this kind of the kind of society we live in today, in terms of just people's
the
sense of
psychological
insecurity,
climate.
right? Is a result of the actions, the supreme narcissism and self-interest and psychopathology of people in positions of power, and how they go about ruling, quote unquote, the country.
Speaking of 9/11, Israel bombed Damascus last night again.
That's one way to help them with their earthquake recovery, right?
Killing 15 people. And it wasn't, targeted airstrikes bullshit. It was, they launched missiles from Golan Heights, just in the city center. 15 people killed. Yeah. And that's after what happened, the earthquake. God knows, Turkey at least. Turkey is much bigger, of course, more resources, more people. But the death toll there is officially now around 42,000 people.
Yeah.
Syria is officially 6,000, but that's going to go way up. They just don't have. They don't have the same resources to do search and recovery and even to count how many people. And of course, it's in territory that's disputed. The Syrian authorities can't get into pockets of places because ISIS, are still present.
Yeah, I saw something. I don't know if I can actually see it here. In the UK Times, to my shame, I'm subscribed to the British Times, the Sunday Times.
Well, you like to be well informed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it. I saw
it's
it.
The Empire's newspaper of record.
It's the thing is, sometimes it has good reports into certain things. That's the only reason I can't subscribe to it. But it's they're sometimes they just put out the worst kind of egregious, black dirty, disgusting propaganda. Let me see if I can. I don't have any articles there. It was basically a report on the. Oh, there it is. And actually, they've changed it. Changed the title of it. Oh yeah. Anyway, yeah, the title of it is "Basking in Adulation: How Assad is Exploiting the Earthquake." The disaster has let the Syrian dictator erase evidence of the regime's heinous crimes, while brazenly demanding funds for reconstruction. And the first paragraph: Bashar al-Assad is laughing. 4 days after an earthquake devastated northwest Syria, Assad and his wife visited sites of destruction and survivors in regime-held Aleppo. Regime-held. Who else is going to hold Aleppo? Imagine.
Yeah,
regime held
al-Nusra.
So it should be, it should be ISIS held Aleppo. Is that what you prefer?
Or American held? I don't know. It's cruel.
This was Assad's first public appearance after the natural disaster struck. He was not solemn. He was literally laughing. And then they have a picture down here of him smiling with a group of people who are also smiling. That level of crass propaganda, you know what I mean? You take there's obvious bias, massive bias, and even bias that even the average person who might support that belief about the Western attitude towards Syria and Assad and the whole history there. Sure, if you had any brain cells at all, you'd say, look, this is obviously a ridiculous hit piece. They show him in amongst people as he's going to like any president would do to disaster, earthquake hit areas, and there are people there, and he's spent quite a long time there, and some people are coming over and they're saying, "Hey, can you get a picture with you?" And he's not actually at some kind of the side of a collapsed building. He's going around meeting people, and some of them come up and smiling at him, and they're saying, "Can I take a picture with you?" And he smiles because they're smiling and they want to take a picture of him. But this is, according to the Times, that means he's laughing because he's just banking it as a result of this earthquake because it's covering up his crimes in regime-held Aleppo. I just barfed all over it. Like, I tried, and you know what? I put a comment to that effect on that article, and immediately it said, and I actually toned it down so there's no bad words, and they said, we're going to have to moderate your comment. Your comment is in moderation. Check back later to see
because it may affect full faith and belief in our beautiful institutions. It gives something away. They don't realize it, but they're projecting onto Assad political intentions. So if there was an earthquake or the natural disaster in Britain, Johnson or Sunak would be out there and he would have talked to his advisor beforehand. How can we shape this to benefit from this crisis. You remember an advisor to Blair after the 7/7 terror attack got in hot water because a hot mic or something, her comments were leaked. She heard about it. And it's in her city, London. And the first thought was, oh, that's great. This is going to be great. Think about the things we can bury under this, the bad news we can bury, that report, that commission, and so on.
Right.
Because that's how they think.
Yeah.
So they're like, they see Assad, or they've said it about Putin dozens of times. Okay, there's a crisis and he's going to it.
Exploit it.
So how has he calculated that he can benefit? Because that is what we would do.
Exactly. Projection, yeah. Psychos. Anyway, it's been a quiet week, all told, after the balloons. Like, I felt a bit deflated after the balloons went away, you know. And then it seems that the news cycle was a bit deflated as well. There wasn't an awful lot going on because it was a high point, you know.
Yeah,
it was.
That's why I said it was disappointing.
It was, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I
deflated.
Felt elated.
You were elated, and then you're deflated,
like up in the clouds, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
it's good.
Yeah,
it felt light, and now it's
airy. Yeah.
Actually, the most talked about thing on the Twitter sphere last week, mostly among Americans, is this train derailment in Ohio.
Yeah. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's obviously horrible, but
a lot of people are saying, "Oh my God, it was done. It was deliberate."
Well,
or at least there's corporate, malfeasance,
probably
lawsuits and stuff.
I kind of think, like I was saying, it tends to lead to that pure self-interest and neglect, and obviously extreme self-interest or supreme self-interest inevitably leads. Supreme self-interest in someone who is responsible for others inevitably leads to neglect of those people that they're responsible for, because they're totally concerned with themselves. So it's not surprising that, there's been talk about American infrastructure failing and all that kind of stuff and being in a terrible state for a very long time. And corporate interests, filters down politics, corporations, hand in glove type thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, directly attributable to some corporate attempts to cut corners, save money, don't give a shit.
Yeah.
That's the kind of chaos that happens as a result.
Yeah.
It's not an accident per se. You know what I mean? It's neglect.
Negligence, definitely. People are going too far, with
Chernobyl.
Potentially it's Chernobyl too, and so there's a few weird things about it though. The name of the place,
East Palestine, yeah.
Although they call it East Palestine or something.
Palestine.
It's the local.
You're not allowed to say Palestine.
East Palestine. What a strange, symbolic name match the universe threw up there.
The Columbia shuttle.
Yeah.
In 2004, it came down officially over Palestine, Texas.
Yeah, another interesting one. So, okay, Chernobyl 2 is too much. The town, bless them, I know there's definitely, local pollution. How far it's spread, possibly, but it's still only a potential killer. I know there were dead fish and animals, and people there they're getting contradictory advice. I mean, I think we can put this all under fecklessness. On the one hand, they were told to evacuate. They've since been told it's okay to go back home. Then they were told the water is safe, but don't drink it. Drink bottled water. No wonder people there. And it did take off. I suppose it's a good sign that there's solidarity with a place of just 5,000 people. That it was the main talking point in social media last week, at least in the US.
Rally people together, yeah.
And there was an interesting fuck up. Team Biden initially decided not to invoke natural disaster, which would have unleashed FEMA support. But apparently they've changed their minds since Trump decided to go visit. I don't know if he's been there yet or if that's to come. They changed their mind when Trump said he was personally going to visit the site. And in their minds, they're doing the same thing. Oh, Trump has calculated he can win politically from this. Indeed, that may be part of Trump's thing. But there's more to it than that. When he knows people are hurting, he's gone. It reminds me of Louisiana flooding during the election 2016. That completely caught them flat-footed because he went there on his plane with Trump-marked boxes of goods delivered to homeless people.
It's better than nothing. Like,
and the moment I saw that, everything for me changed. I was like, he's going to win this election, because Hillary instead tweeted from her apartment, "Oh, poor people in Louisiana," and that's like, I thought he's winning, And And so they still have that in mind. They still are making domestic political decisions based on how to outmaneuver Trump, even on this, what is still just a small local issue, even though it has national attention. You know,
apparently the group, the individuals involved in testing, or trying to figure out why the train derailed, or is the actual company that owns the trains. So it's an example of the kind of corporate government, the blending of
uniquely
corporations.
American, I believe.
Well, it's a blend, yeah, exactly. Blending
it's
of
fascism.
Corporations and governments, basically. You know what I mean?
It's official definition of fascism.
The government just hands it off to the corporation because there's no difference.
I think part of what's going on is a bit of hysteria on people's part, but I don't blame them. What they're seeing is it's the effect of living under psychopathy.
Yeah.
And the fecklessness, the lack of infrastructure. There have been 3 train derailments of freight cargo like this since then. And
a lot happen every year, apparently.
A lot happen every year, and it's happening more and more. I think there's no clear statistics on it. There is a Wikipedia page.
It's very strange that it
and they
happens
list
so
them
often
though,
in the US.
and it is the list goes longer as you get closer to. We started to notice this about 12 years ago. We first started cataloging them on SOT. So here's one, for example. This is actually from this week, 9 years ago. Pennsylvania headline: 6th major train derailment in 5 weeks. 4,000 gallons of oil spilled in Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, 2014. I think people are confusing. I think a lot of people are new to this. They've had their eyes awakened by COVID,
right?
And they're seeing they're seeing patterns, and the patterns run amok where they see intention where there is none. And they're missing the forest and the trees kind of thing. No, you're waking up in the midst of your society coming off the rails.
Right.
But if you'd been watching this 15 years ago, you'd have seen this coming,
Yeah. It's, I mean, it is unusual. I mean, I think if you compare other countries, so America is a bigger country than most other, all other, let's say, Western countries, excluding Russia. But it still doesn't account for the large, shockingly large number of train derailments every year that happen in the US, because you don't see. I mean, when was the last time you heard of a train derailment in France or Germany or the UK? It just doesn't happen. Anything close to the number that happens because it would be news in European countries. But is
there better upkeep?
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. It has to be that. It has to be infrastructure. You know what I mean, or just rules, regulations, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not good. But yeah, I don't know what else. Ukraine, what's going on? When's Russia going to win, Neil?
Well, this is what I was alluding to earlier. I think this week could be crunch time. Now, everyone and his dog is predicting how it will happen. It could be sudden, but it could be slow as well. Why don't we just keep doing what we're doing and just increase the supply of forces, and it'll just gradually change? Is there any? Oh, well, that's another clue to what's coming. And another thing that got me thinking of this particular week, the anniversary of things that Putin seems to like. He's to make just some announcement. Yeah, Peskov said he's making a big speech on the anniversary of the recognition. So that's the 21st. So Tuesday. This Tuesday. He has something to say about it. So that may be, usually when he does a speech, that's because something has changed or something is about to follow.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk, obviously a lot of speculation, and we don't really know what's going to happen. But it seems that, with all the talk of the hysteria around getting tanks to Ukraine, and then there not really being much in the way of tanks to provide Ukraine, Europeans saying that we're running out of ammunition, running out of supplies to send to Ukraine. The Americans saying the same thing, and Russia having mobilized there several months ago and then be in a position to start a bigger offensive. Of course, nobody should expect it's anything dramatic like in the movies or whatever, but there can be something a bit more dramatic than the slow grind that has been so far. Whether or not what will actually result from that, whether there'll be some, I don't think anybody should expect this. You can have some faith or some trust in the statements of Western politicians that it's going to go on for quite a while longer. Maybe it won't go on for years and years and years, as Stoltenberg has said, but because I think he's a buffoon. But I'd say we're going to be talking about what the conflict in Ukraine, at least for the next several months, in a similar way. Although, like you said, I think there is some more dramatic gains will be made by Russia in the next few weeks, and maybe in the next few weeks to a couple of months, and that may change. But at any point, enough gains and enough of sufficient attrition of Ukrainian manpower and supplies can actually tip it to the point where it's it's definitive in a certain sense, where that doesn't mean that Ukraine's going to immediately fly the white flag and Zelensky's going to come and ask for terms, but that we'll see some more significant progress than has been the case for the past year.
Yeah,
I'll have to wait and see. It's one of those things. That kind of war is slow and difficult.
Yeah, the Western think tanks are starting to ask, is the Ukraine war moving toward a Korea solution?
Yeah.
Which by definition means a dividing line,
right.
DMZ.
Yeah.
That half's theirs, this half's ours.
Right. Maybe that may actually happen. That's like we were saying earlier on. There's a lot of precedent for that. East, West Germany, North, South Korea, many other places.
North, South Vietnam.
Right. Many other places around the world, in Africa and Asia, that was the solution, And then you have to wait 20 or 30 years until you get reunification, because everything's different now. So wait and see. But I don't know about you, but I'm going to leave it there. And even if you don't agree, I'm going to get up and leave, and you can carry on. Is that okay?
No, I'm getting out of
You're
here.
getting out of here too. Okay. So on that note, then we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for chatting. Don't forget to smash all the buttons if you haven't done so already. We'll be back next week with another one. So until then, have a good week and stay safe and all those things. See ya.
Thanks for watching. Bye all.
Can't stop the signal now.